Monique Washington never thought a simple graduation gift could turn into a battleground. She was just 16, barely 5 feet tall, with neat cornrows that framed her determined eyes. Clutching her oversized gray hoodie around her shoulders and shouldering a navy backpack, she moved through the gleaming marble concourse of the international terminal like a ghost, quiet, humble, unnoticed. A single boarding pass tucked in her sleeve bore her destiny. First class, seat 3B, on flight 554 to New York. That ticket was a gift from her godmother, Evelyn Brooks, a powerhouse who had spent her life turning whispered complaints into headlines. Monique believed in keeping a low profile, but today she would learn that silence can roar. She boarded early and slipped into her seat without a word. Her earbuds dangled, her science fiction novel lay open in her lap, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe. All around her, the polished wood veneer and buttery leather of the cabin exuded an effortless luxury she'd only glimpsed in magazines. The flight attendant made her way down the aisle, heels clicking, uniform crisp, blonde hair pulled into an ironed bun. Her name tag read Parker. Ms. Parker's eyes scanned each passenger with a thin veneer of professionalism, but when they landed on Monique, something in that calm surface cracked. "You're in the wrong seat," Ms. Parker said, loud enough for 4 rows of passengers to hear. Her voice was flat, but it carried an undercurrent of accusation. Monique's heart skipped. She looked up, brow furrowing. "This is my seat," she said softly, extending the boarding pass. Parker's lips tightened. She leaned in, voice dropping. "Where's your ticket?" Monique pulled the paper from her sleeve and handed it over. Parker studied it for a long beat, her frown deepening like storm clouds gathering. Those eyes, perfectly lined with shadow, brimmed with suspicion. Open suspicion, the worst kind. The attendant cleared her throat. "First classes for first-class passengers?" Her words hovered in the air like a verdict. Monique felt the heat creep up her neck, but she held her gaze. Passengers glanced over, some curious, most uncomfortable, none willing to intervene. Parker swept the slip back into her hand and shook her head as if swatting a fly. "You need to move to economy so we can continue boarding." There was no plea in Monique, no begging or tears. She stood, squared her shoulders, and walked the length of the cabin, past glossy tabletops and silver-trimmed dividers, past whispering travelers and empty stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, her humiliation of physical weight crushing her confidence. She found a window seat in the back, 27F, and sat down, backpack at her feet. Her eyes drifted to the tarmac, past the tinted window, and she wondered how something so small, a ticket, could make someone judge her worth. Once seated, she pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered, then typed one sentence. "I don't belong." I moved to the back. She pressed send. The glow of the screen dimmed, and she stared at the overhead bins, as if the answer might come from the overhead announcement system instead of her godmother. Her phone buzzed. She opened the message. "What happened?" was all Evelyn Brooks asked. Monique's reply was terse. "The flight attendant kicked me out of first class." "Send." The word darted across the miles to Evelyn, and for the first time Monique wondered if her godmother really could handle this from 30,000 feet up. Seconds later, a new message arrived. "Send me the flight number." Monique fumbled for the ticket again, her hands trembling. She sent the information, bracing herself for whatever came next. Within 10 seconds, new instructions appeared. "Stay in your seat. Don't say anything else. I'll handle it." She tucked her phone away and settled back into her seat, every nerve ending alive with dread and hope. On the flight deck, the pilot finished his checks and moved to engage the engines. The cabin lights flickered but did not dim. The engines remained silent, and the usual pushback didn't happen. Confusion rippled through the crew as a scratchy voice came over the cockpit headset. "Hold position at the gate. This flight is under review by the FAA. Do not proceed to runway." A hush fell over first class. Ms. Parker, standing in the galley with a plastic cup of water, froze mid-sip. Relief must have washed over her. She believed the humiliation was done, that Monique had slunk away quietly like she was meant to. In her mind, she had simply followed protocol. Meanwhile, in first class, a young attendant named Luis had watched everything unfold. He had seen the disbelief in Monique's eyes, the way her fingers clenched that boarding pass. Watching Parker smugly sip her water, Luis could stay silent no longer. He approached, voice low but firm. "You think it's over?" he asked. Parker's brow rose. "What did you say?" she snapped. He met her glare. That girl had a real ticket. You asked her to leave just because she didn't look like first class. She turned away, stripping the cup and slipping it back onto the service cart. Her shoulders rose and fell in a controlled breath, but Luis saw the confidence drain from her posture. In the economy cabin, Monique's seatmate, a woman in a beige cardigan working a crossword puzzle, looked up at that moment and smiled sympathetically. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked gently. Monique nodded. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice trembled like a soft echo behind her calm words. Ego in first class, whispers spread. A passenger in a gray sweater leaned toward his wife. "Did you see what happened to that girl?" he murmured. She shook her head, mouth set. "It didn't feel right," she replied. All around the cabin, tension coiled like a spring. Passengers checked watches, refreshed phones, scanned faces for answers. "Telia's, no, Monique's." Phone glowed again. "FALA agents are en route. No one takes off until they've spoken. All conduct is being documented. If anyone harasses you again, tell me immediately." She closed her eyes and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. A faint smile brushed her lips, not of triumph, but of relief that someone heard her, believed her. For the first time, she felt less invisible. In the cockpit, the captain received a second call from someone identifying himself as James Sandler, operations lead at the FAA. "On behalf of Director Evelyn Brooks, we request the aircraft remain at the gate until our representatives arrive. There is a serious matter involving discriminatory conduct that must be addressed immediately." Evelyn Brooks! The name rolled through the cockpit like thunderclaps on a summer storm. The captain closed his eyes, then spoke with a gravity he reserved for emergencies. "This is no longer internal. It's federal now." Passengers exchanged glances, an unspoken solidarity passing among them. In economy, the crossword woman folded her puzzle and reached out a hand, offering it to Monique. First-class travelers leaned back, grudging respect etched on their faces. Miss Parker stood frozen, water cup still in hand, realizing her casual cruelty had triggered a showdown she could never control. Monique pressed a hand to her chest as if steadying her own heart. She had paid her dues. She had never asked for this fight, but now it was coming for her. And with Evelyn Brooks on her side, it would not end until justice was served, and everyone on this plane would remember her name. Monique sat motionless, though inside she felt every heartbeat echo through her chest. The cabin was hushed, as if the roar of the jet engines had been replaced by the thrum of collective conscience. No one joked about their seats anymore. No steward offered snacks. It felt like a courtroom, every passenger a silent juror, and the defendant had been named without ceremony, the single African-American girl in seat 27F. Sunlight poured through the windows, painting her shadow long across the aisle. Her phone lay face down on the tray table. She did not need to check it. Evelyn's words still pulsed in her mind. "Stay in your seat. Don't speak to anyone else. I'll handle it." That promise had given her courage, but now it carried responsibility. She was no longer just a passenger. She was a symbol of every injustice that had ever gone unchallenged. Up front, Captain Monroe sat rigid in the cockpit. His co-pilot glanced at him, hovered over the controls, then thought better of asking questions. They were grounded by direct FAA order, unprecedented in 2 decades of flights. The enormity of forcing a plane to stop for discrimination weighed on him like gravity. In Washington, D.C., Evelyn Brooks remained stoic at her desk. No sighs, no drama, only focus. Her assistant hovered, waiting for instructions. Evelyn glanced at the folder on her desk. Flight Attendant Parker, 20 years of service. Never a complaint, multiple commendations for maintaining cabin order. Evelyn tapped the folder shut with a quiet click. Order can hide cruelty, she thought. Order can be a weapon. She turned back to her screen and typed swiftly through the FAA's internal system. Request cabin audio and passenger logs from Flight 545. Passenger logs from Flight 545, make it urgent. No one would stop her. In the cabin, Monique felt eyes on her, but not with disdain this time. There was guilt, the first stirrings of shame in those glances. Passengers shifted in their seats, remembering how easy it had been to look away. The woman next to Monique, in her beige cardigan, closed her book with a soft snap. She turned fully toward Monique, absurdly aware of the book's cover, and asked in a gentle voice, "Are you all right?" Monique gave a small nod. "I'm fine, ma'am." Her voice was quiet but steady. She spoke like an adult, measured, calm. The woman's lips pressed together as she tried to smile back. That simple exchange sent ripples of empathy through the cabin. Meanwhile, Miss Parker hovered in the galley, clutching the counter's stainless steel edge as though it were a lifeline. 30 minutes since scheduled departure, and still no announcement. She heard the faint hum of the auxiliary power unit, but nothing that sounded like progress. The other flight attendants avoided her eyes, shuffling past her in silence. Panic fluttered beneath her calm facade. She tapped on the cockpit door, then knocked again. No answer. A young attendant intercepted her. "The captain asked not to be disturbed," he said softly. "What?" Parker's voice cracked. "We're almost an hour delayed." He offered no excuses. He simply looked at her, eyes conveying what words could not. "You made this happen." The grief in his gaze cut deeper than any reprimand. Across the aisle in first class, Ronald Hastings adjusted the cuff of his suit jacket with a gold watch glinting at his wrist. "Looks like we are part of something bigger than we thought," he told the woman next to him. She swallowed, nodding slowly. "I think maybe we stayed silent too long," she whispered. Luis, the young flight attendant who had stood up for Monique, strolled down the aisle behind them. He did not speak. He let his gaze meet every passenger's, a silent reminder that they could no longer hide behind apathy. When he reached Monique's row, their eyes locked. He offered a simple nod. No pity, no promises, only acknowledgement. Monique nodded back, not meekly but with quiet pride. At the front, the cockpit door slid open. Monique saw the back of 2 FAA officers ascending the aisle. Their uniforms were crisp, their badges gleaming. They did not carry weapons or cameras. Their presence alone demanded attention. The door remained ajar behind them, as if inviting anyone to witness the reckoning that was about to unfold. In the galley, Parker's fingers tightened around the counter until her knuckles whitened. She had told herself it was a misunderstanding. She had checked the manifest, she said. She had followed protocol. But every word echoed hollowly now. She had judged a young black girl on sight. She had let prejudice masquerade as professionalism. She had unleashed consequences she could never control. Louise, the senior flight attendant, approached with measured steps. "Are you all right?" he asked. His tone was neither harsh nor kind. It was neutral, leaving space for truth. Parker did not turn. Her voice trembled. "I already apologized. I let her return to her seat. I did everything right after that." Louise shook his head slowly. "This is not about a seat anymore. It is about the way you looked at someone, as though they had no right to be here." The words struck her like a blow. Silence fell again. In that hush, the cabin felt smaller, the walls thinner, as though it might collapse under the weight of collective shame. An elderly man in seat 2D wiped his glasses, not because they were dirty, but because he could not bear the reflection of his own eyes. A pregnant woman leaned toward her husband, whispered, "Should we have said something?" He just squeezed her hand, unable to find words. Monique returned Evelyn's message one more time. "Thank you." She pressed send, and though the reply never came, she did not need it. She felt supported, seen. The FAA officers reached the galley. The lead agent, a tall woman whose uniform bore no name tag, surveyed Parker with a steady gaze. The other agent, shorter, quieter, carried a small tablet. They did not smile, they did not scold. They simply glanced at the manifest and turned their attention to Parker. "Ms. Parker," the tall agent said calmly, "we have reason to believe a passenger was removed from her seat due to discriminatory conduct. We are documenting her testimony. Please remain here for questioning." Parker's shoulders sagged. The uniform no longer protected her. The water cup rolled off the counter, shattered on the floor. Its contents sloshed across the tile like spilled innocence. She did not cry. She simply stared at the shards, too stunned to move. In economy, Monique watched as the officers led Parker away. She felt neither triumph nor anger. She felt relief mixed with sorrow. She looked out the window again, catching a glimpse of the black SUV with the FAA logo creeping beside the jet bridge. Passengers stirred, their faces marked by the shared experience of witnessing injustice confronted. They would remember this moment long after the engines roared to life. They would recall how a quiet teenager in a gray hoodie forced them to confront their own silence. Monique closed her eyes and let the sunlight warm her face. The girl who had been made to feel unworthy of her seat now held the power to change a system, and she had done it without raising her voice. The cabin door closed behind the agents, the galley lights switched back on, and the hum of life aboard an airplane returned, but nothing was the same. Because Monique Washington had shown them the truth, that standing still, speaking only with dignity, could be louder than any declaration, and that justice, once awakened, could not be silenced. Monique felt the cabin shift beneath her like a living thing. Each passenger's breath seemed synchronized, holding the moment in place. She pressed her fingertips against the cold plastic of the tray table and reminded herself that this was still her journey. She pictured home waiting for her, her mom's sweet potato pie, her little brother's goofy grin, and let that warmth anchor her. But as she looked around, she saw more than bystanders. She saw people waking up to their own conscience. Louise returned to his station near row 5, where he polished a stack of service menus. His usual confident smile was tempered with something softer now, a companionable solidarity. He caught Monique's eye and offered a small thumbs up. She returned it, and with that silent exchange, they sealed an unspoken pact. She would hold her ground, and he would stand with her. Down at the galley, Ms. Parker sat on a stainless steel stool, head bowed, phone clutched in one hand. She scrolled through her notifications as if searching for a lifeline. A text from a friend defending her, an email from her supervisor offering counsel, but the only messages she found were news alerts about delays on Flight 555 and 454, dozens of angry tweets tagging Horizon Airlines, and a single email from the FAA. You are required to appear for an interview regarding alleged discriminatory conduct. No supportive words, no loopholes. Her breath caught. All those years of procedures followed had brought her here, alone, exposed, vulnerable. Agent Catherine Reeves stepped forward. Tall and composed, she carried a leather binder stamped with the FAA seal. Agent Simon Price followed with a digital recorder and a tablet. They paused at the galley entrance, their eyes sweeping the cabin before settling on Parker. Neither raised a brow. Neither offered reassurance. They simply waited. Ms. Parker swallowed. She rose unsteadily and smoothed her uniform blouse. The fabric felt suffocating now. She offered her badge and credentials, which they scanned without comment. Reeves opened her binder. "Ms. Parker, please recount what happened in first class earlier," she said, voice calm and neutral. Parker's legs trembled. She drew in a shaky breath. I approached seat 3B. I asked the passenger to show her boarding pass because protocol requires verification of seat assignment. She handed it to me. I glanced at it, saw it was valid, and then... Her voice faltered. She glanced toward Monique, who met her gaze with composed solemnity. Reeves nodded, pen poised. Why did you believe she did not belong in first class? Parker's cheeks burned. I don't know. I saw someone who didn't fit the usual profile for first-class passengers. It was just an assumption based on her appearance. The words felt like daggers in her own chest. I recognize now that was wrong. Reeves closed her binder and looked up. Thank you. We will be in touch about next steps. She turned on her heel and stepped back into the aisle. Price followed without a backward glance. As they disappeared, Parker slumped against the counter. Louise found her there moments later and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. What happens now? Louise asked quietly. Parker shook her head. I don't know. They said they'll contact me. I've never faced anything like this. Her voice cracked on the last word. Louise offered a sympathetic nod. You'll get through this. I know you'll do the right thing. Across the cabin, Monique watched this exchange unfold. She felt a flicker of compassion for Parker, an imperfect human caught in her own mistake. But she also felt the unyielding truth that actions have consequences. There would be no erasing this moment, but maybe there could be redemption. The captain's voice finally came over the PA, measured and firm. Ladies and gentlemen, this flight will remain at the gate. We apologize for the inconvenience. FAA representatives will conclude their review shortly. We appreciate your patience. The words were bland, but the passengers applauded anyway, half in relief, half in acknowledgement that justice had, at least for now, paused their journey. Monique exhaled and reached into her pocket for her phone. She typed a message to Evelyn. Thank you. Evelyn's reply was swift. Proud of you. Remember who you are. Monique tucked the phone away and closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility eased by support. Nearby, the woman in the beige cardigan leaned in. You were so brave, she whispered. You handled that with more grace than I could ever hope for. Monique shook her head. I had to stay true to myself. The woman nodded, tears brimming. You reminded me of something important. Kindness has power, but dignity has strength. Louise came by with bottled water and a soft smile. Monique accepted the water and drank deeply. She felt gratitude for the flight attendant who had spoken up, for the passengers who had watched, and for the FAA agents who had refused to ignore injustice. The cabin felt transformed, not by the motion of the plane, but by the collective awakening of everyone on board. Out the window, the black FAA SUV's engine idled as an agent reviewed documents beside the aircraft's stairs. Monique wondered how long it would take before wheels would roll and the engines would roar. But more than that, she wondered what Horizon Airlines would do next. Would they fire Parker outright or mandate diversity training? Would they send an apology gift basket filled with generic snacks, or would they take this as an opportunity to change how they coached every crew member? The answer came in the form of a service announcement. A flight attendant stepped into the aisle and spoke clearly. "On behalf of Horizon Airlines, we apologize to all passengers for this delay and for any discomfort experienced today. We are reviewing our protocols to ensure every passenger, regardless of age, race, or appearance, is treated with respect. We thank you for your patience and commitment to fairness." Polite applause rippled through the cabin again, but this time it was sincere. Monique smiled as the attendant continued. "We will offer each passenger a voucher for a future flight, valid on any Horizon Airlines route. We appreciate your understanding." Passengers exchanged relieved glances and murmured gratefully to one another. Monique felt a swell of pride, not because of the voucher, but because her courage had sparked a real apology and a pledge to change. Captain Monroe's voice returned over the PA. "We have clearance from the FAA. We will be pushing back in 5 minutes. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The crew sprang into action, securing service carts and checking that rows were clear. Monique buckled her seatbelt, her heart still racing but steady with confidence. In first class, Parker gathered her belongings from the galley and passed them to Louise. "I'm going to cooperate fully with the investigation," she said, voice soft but resolute, "and I'll do whatever Horizon asks to make this right." Louise placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "That's all anyone can ask." Monique leaned back and gazed at the seat in front of her. She pictured that plush leather before her godmother's intervention, but this time she felt no sting. She had owned every moment of this ordeal. She had refused to be invisible. And now, as the engines roared to life and the plane began its gentle pushback, she knew her life had changed. When the wheels lifted off the runway, Monique closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not for the turbulence she had endured, but for the clarity it brought. She had discovered a power she never knew she possessed, the power of self-respect, magnified by the voices that choose to stand together. The horizon stretched before her, limitless as her future. And somewhere above the clouds, Evelyn Brooks allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Monique Washington felt the gentle hum of the engines beneath her seat as the aircraft climbed through pale morning skies. She kept her eyes closed, but she was not resting. Instead, she replayed every moment of the past 2 hours, letting each sensation anchor her resolve. The cold plastic of the tray table, the hush of passengers' breaths, the stern tilt of Officer Rodis's head, all of it had become part of her story. The thought soothed her. She had faced cruelty with dignity, and now she would see that dignity carried her forward. Beside her, the woman in the beige cardigan leaned over once more. "Monique," she said softly, "do you want something to read, a magazine perhaps?" Monique opened her eyes and smiled, touched by the grandmotherly kindness. "Thank you," she replied in her clear adult voice. "I would love that." When the woman passed her the glossy pages, Monique thumbed through articles about travel and cooking, letting the mundane details of vacation planning replace the adrenaline in her veins. The simple act of turning pages felt liberating. Across the aisle, Luis walked by on his way to secure the service cart. Their eyes met, and he offered her another reassuring nod. The confidence in his gaze had not vanished. It had grown. He paused and whispered, "You did the right thing." Monique nodded and mouthed, "Thank you." His support reminded her she was not alone. This moment was about much more than seats or ticket stubs. It was about seeing injustice and refusing to look away. In the rear galley, Ms. Parker remained slumped in the jump seat. Louise knelt beside her and folded an extra blanket around her shoulders. "You're safe here," he said gently. "They're reviewing, but for now, you're okay." Parker pressed the cloth of the blanket to her face, breathing in its softness. Her uniform's crisp lines had betrayed her earlier confidence, and now she felt the weight of every choice she had made. If only she could rewind time and ask for help, instead of deciding alone. Louise stayed close, sensing how fragile she was. "I've seen you handle conflicts before," he continued. "You stood by me when I was new. Let me stand by you now." Parker lifted her tear-glossed eyes. She shook her head without words. Louise's loyalty encompassed far more than protocol. She realized that following procedure could lead to cruelty if it became an excuse for inaction. Up in the cockpit, Captain Monroe stared at the flight path on his display. He had flown this airline for 18 years and logged thousands of departures. Never had a flight paused for discrimination. It felt like flying through uncharted airspace. He glanced at his co-pilot, who met his gaze with steady calm. "We're in good hands," the co-pilot said quietly. "We did the right thing." The captain exhaled. This flight would be remembered for much more than turbulence. It would be a turning point. Back in the cabin, a woman in row 7 pressed her call button. A flight attendant arrived with a bright smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. The woman pointed at Monique. "Could you please bring her some tea? She might appreciate something warm." The attendant gathered a tea bag and hot water and delivered it to Monique with a respectful nod. Monique sipped slowly, the steam warming her face, and let gratitude flow through her. Small kindnesses could heal wounds larger than seats. Ronald Hastings adjusted his cufflinks and cleared his throat before speaking to his wife. "I'm going to write a letter," he said. "I want to tell Horizon Airlines how they handled this." His wife nodded and squeezed his hand. "And I will sign it," she added, "because silence is the easiest choice, but it can cost us our humanity." Ronald smiled faintly, acknowledging that the plane's delay had been inconvenient, but the lesson was invaluable. Throughout first class, conversations sprang to life, soft but certain. Passengers shared thoughts they had suppressed earlier. The young woman with the tablet in 1C spoke with the stockbroker in 1A about using their connections to fund diversity workshops. A retired history teacher in row 2 discussed hosting community dialogues. Every idea rippled outward, reminding Monique that momentum born of courage could change more than one flight. In the economy cabin, the pregnant woman in 4A and her husband exchanged contact details with Monique's neighbors. "If you ever need anything," they said, "we're here." Monique accepted their offered friendship. She thought of the bond formed in hushed solidarity on this flight, connections forged in the crucible of shared responsibility. Meanwhile, at FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C., Evelyn Brooks stood before a screen showing real-time audio transcriptions and digital logs from Flight 554. She tapped commands rapidly, analyzing every phrase Parker had uttered. She called in a task force to review discrimination policies across all major airlines. Spreadsheets and flowcharts flickered behind her. This was bigger than a single incident. It was a systemic reckoning. Evelyn's assistant entered with coffee cups balanced on a tray. "Director," he said, "the board meeting at Horizon begins in an hour. They're expecting your input." Evelyn set down her cup. "Good," she replied. "It's time to hold them to account." She drafted an email instructing her team to push for mandatory bias training and transparent reporting. No more hushed complaints. She would ensure every passenger's voice could reach an authority that would listen. On board, Monique closed her eyes and visualized her next steps. She would return home to Richmond, Virginia, and share her experience with her school's student council. She would speak at the PTA and her church. She felt empathy for Parker. Had the flight attendant known who Monique was, perhaps she would have thought differently. But ignorance did not excuse cruelty, and now Monique could be a teacher of compassion. In the galley, Parker sat up straighter. Louise handed her a logbook and pen. "Maybe you should record your reflections," he suggested. "It might help you understand why this happened." Parker opened the book and began to write. "I saw a girl who did not look like she belonged. I did not think to ask for help. I believed procedure was all that mattered. Now, I know procedures must be guided by empathy. As she wrote, each word felt like a small step toward redemption. She resolved that when the inquiry concluded, she would volunteer to help design Horizon's new training program. Maybe then she could transform her mistake into a force for good. She paused and wiped her pen on her sleeve, determined to see this change through. Suddenly, the captain's voice crackled over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for our descent. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." A collective rustle filled the cabin, but the energy felt different, focused, uplifted. Monique buckled in and felt the familiar drop as the aircraft began its final approach. She watched the world outside blur until Richmond's lights appeared like stars fallen to earth. At the gate, an airport services manager waited with a small podium, anticipating a press gathering. News crews lined the terminal windows. Almost before the door opened, agents and airline representatives hurried on board to escort Parker and Monique to separate meet-and-greet areas. Monique stood and looked out at the cluster of cameras. She felt a flicker of nerves, but she steadied herself. She had spoken with her actions. Now perhaps she would speak with her words. Off to one side, Ms. Parker composed herself, smoothing her hair and uniform as best she could. Louise remained by her side, a silent pillar. His presence reminded her that redemption was possible, but it would require more than words. Monique stepped into the fluorescent glare of the terminal press area as dozens of cameras snapped their shutters. The cold evening air mixed with bright lights, but she felt warmed by purpose. She drew in a steady breath and walked to the podium. Reporters hushed and awaited her first words. She smiled gently and began, "Good evening. My name is Monique Washington, and today I want to thank everyone who stood up for fairness on Flight 554. Her voice carried warmth, yet strength. She spoke about inclusion, about the quiet power of witnesses, and about how one teen's dignity can spark change for thousands. The cameras panned to Ms. Parker, seated to the side with Louise's supportive hand on her shoulder. Monique paused, eyes meeting Parker's. She said, "I forgive you, Miss Parker, because I believe people can learn from their mistakes." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Parker's shoulders jerked as tears glistened in her eyes. That evening, Horizon Airlines board convened an emergency meeting. The CEO, Marlene Tate, presided over a gleaming mahogany table. Evelyn Brooks joined via secure video link, her presence commanding respect. Evelyn reviewed the audio logs and passenger feedback, her tone direct. "We must implement zero-tolerance discrimination policies, launch company-wide training, and establish a transparent reporting hotline." Tate nodded, voice steady. "We will issue a formal apology and create a passenger advocacy council." Board members exchanged resolute glances. Meanwhile, Ms. Parker sat in a quiet office at Horizon's headquarters. A human resources manager offered tissues and a glass of water. Parker's voice trembled as she spoke. "I let stereotypes guide my actions. I hurt a young woman who did nothing wrong." She pressed the tissue to her eyes. "I want to make amends, not because I was caught, but because it was my moment to change." The manager leaned forward. "Your sincerity will help shape our new training. Your story can prevent future harm." Over the next week, Parker shared her experience in workshops with fellow flight attendants. She spoke candidly about how fear and assumptions blinded her judgment. She listened as colleagues admitted their own quiet doubts when serving passengers who looked different. Each testimony deepened her remorse and fueled her commitment. By the end of the training session, she had drafted a code of empathy to guide every cabin crew member's conduct. Monique returned home to Richmond and was greeted by her family. The front porch glowed with lanterns as her mother wrapped her in a hug and her younger brother cheered. Her church community gathered that Sunday and she spoke from the pulpit. "Justice is not always loud," she said, "but when we choose dignity over indifference, we change the world." The congregation rose in applause, tears shining on elderly cheeks. News outlets ran follow-up stories. One segment featured aerial footage of Flight 555's journey, with a voiceover highlighting Monique's grace and Parker's apology. Social media campaigns used the hashtag #FlyFair to share stories of passengers who experienced kindness in unexpected moments. Monique's image, hoodie and all, became a symbol of quiet strength. Back in Washington, Evelyn Brooks presented the FAA's new passenger rights initiative to congressional subcommittees. Lawmakers listened attentively as she laid out proposed regulations requiring airlines to provide anti-bias training every 6 months and to report all discrimination complaints within 24 hours. A bipartisan coalition formed to support the legislation. Evelyn smiled, knowing a system was shifting toward accountability. On board a different Horizon Airlines flight a month later, Parker served passengers with renewed compassion. She noticed a middle-aged man struggling with a carry-on bag. She knelt to help him, asking kindly, "May I give you a hand?" His grateful smile reminded her how simple acts can restore trust. She locked eyes with Luis across the aisle. His approving nod felt like redemption. Back at her high school, Monique's student council organized a Fly Fair week. They set up information booths about passenger rights and trained peers to be upstanders in school hallways. The principal commended their initiative at the town council meeting. Monique realized that standing up to injustice on an airplane had blossomed into a movement for respect everywhere. On the 2-year anniversary of Flight 554, Monique and Ms. Parker met again at a commemorative event at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. The exhibit showcased the original boarding pass, the audio recorder, and a timeline of changes inspired by the incident. Parker approached Monique and embraced her. "You changed my life," she whispered. Monique squeezed her hand and replied, "You changed mine too." As they stood beneath the suspended airplane model, sunlight filtering through the glass ceiling, Monique reflected on her journey. She had boarded that flight as a quiet teen and emerged as a catalyst for change. She had learned that standing still, speaking only with dignity, can be louder than any protest. And she had found that forgiveness and empathy can heal wounds deeper than any apology. Monique's story spread beyond American skies. International carriers adopted similar training programs. The World Aviation Council recognized her with a Global Peace Award. She traveled to airports in Europe and Asia, sharing her message with thousands. Each time she spoke, she reminded people that dignity belongs to everyone, in every seat. At home in Richmond, Monique kept her framed award in the living room. Her mother placed fresh flowers beside it every week. Visitors often asked about the story behind the crystal plaque. Monique would smile and say, "It all started with a boarding pass and the belief that everyone deserves respect." In her heart, she knew that moments of cruelty can become moments of compassion, that one person's refusal to look away can ripple into lasting change, and that sometimes the most powerful revenge is justice served quietly, without anger, but with unwavering grace. Officer Rodis's footsteps rang softly on the aisle floor as she and the operations liaison advanced toward the rear of the cabin. Their badges caught the soft amber light, signaling authority without raising their voices. Monique Holloway sat upright in seat 3B, her calm posture an unspoken challenge to anyone who doubted her right to be there. Ms. Parker stood near the galley doorway, her shoulders tense as she awaited her summons. The entire aircraft felt suspended, passengers, crew, and pilots alike held in collective suspense. Rhodys reached Parker first. "Emma Parker," she said in a measured tone, "you are to join me in the forward review area." Parker's throat worked as she managed a nod. Her once proud uniform now felt like armor turned against her. She marched forward, head bowed, as Monique rose to follow, her backpack strap cutting a sharp line of determination across her gray hoodie. The entire cabin shifted. Eyes moved from seat to seat, their owners wrestling with guilt and relief. Louise stepped aside with a respectful inclination of his head. He did not speak, but his silent support echoed through every passenger. Nearby, Ronald Hastings pressed his lips together. He had been on the fence when Parker first accused Monique, but now felt a fierce compulsion to witness the reckoning. He clenched his fists so tightly, his knuckles whitened. In the compact forward compartment, harsh fluorescent lights revealed every crease in Rhodes's crisp uniform. A single metal chair awaited Monique in the center of the room. Parker sank into the seat opposite her, her eyes never quite meeting Monique's. The operations liaison and Rhodes stood behind them, silent but watchful. "Ms. Parker," Rhodes began, her voice cool, "explain why you ordered Ms. Holloway to relocate to economy." Parker inhaled deeply. "I assumed she did not belong in first class. She did not match the profile I was accustomed to seeing." Her confession landed like a blow. "I saw her as less than, not worthy. I failed to verify properly, and I relied on prejudice." Her voice cracked on that word, and small tears sprang to her eyes. Monique watched in muted sorrow. Sympathy knotted in her chest despite the deep humiliation she had endured. Parker's shame was real, yet insufficient to erase the cruelty. The liaison stepped forward. "Your failure endangered passenger trust and violated federal non-discrimination statutes. This preliminary review will determine further action." Parker's face went ashen. She nodded again, accepting whatever fate waited. Monique's heart pounded, but she spoke only through steady breathing. She did not need to say anything. The truth of Parker's words carried its own weight. Behind her, the cabin lights dimmed in preparation for descent. Monique could almost feel the engine's roar building outside. When the hearing concluded, Parker rose unsteadily. Rhodes flicked her gaze toward Monique. "This matter will proceed to formal adjudication. You may return to your seat, Ms. Holloway." Parker led the way back, shoulders heavy, and Monique followed, her presence a living rebuke to every silent witness. As Monique passed the rows, passengers bowed their heads or offered small nods. The pregnant woman in 4A whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't help sooner." Monique pressed her lips together and whispered back, "It's not too late to speak up when it matters." That moment of shared conviction rippled through the cabin like an undercurrent of resolve. Parker returned to the galley, where Louise awaited her with a glass of water. He slid it across silently. She lifted it with trembling fingers and drank. Louise placed a hand on her forearm. "You will face consequences, but you can shape your own future by owning this mistake." Parker nodded through tears. Back in her seat, Monique felt a surge of compassion even as her anger lingered. She closed her eyes and drew in the soft amber glow. This was a victory of principle over prejudice, yet it stung that it had taken such cruelty to reach it. She tapped her phone and sent one more message to Evelyn. "Justice is underway." Evelyn's reply was immediate. "I know you'll help guide the change that follows." Meanwhile, Ms. Parker underwent intensive empathy training. In small group sessions, she listened to stories of discrimination from diverse communities. Each account etched fresh lines of regret across her face, but also sparked resolve. She volunteered to assist with the airline's new Passenger Advocacy Council, determined to transform her failure into healing for others. At FAA headquarters, Evelyn Brooks convened a summit with legal counsel, communications directors, and regional supervisors. "This cannot be an isolated moment," she insisted. "We must rewrite the rules so that no passenger ever faces this again." Her laptop projected a new nationwide policy framework. One by one, stakeholders pledged their support. Even skeptical regional supervisors recognized that real change was overdue. As the policy took shape, federal affairs liaisons drafted legislation to codify these rules into law, the FLM's Act, mandating transparency, prompt reporting and accountability for all U.S. carriers. Congress held hearings where Evelyn and Monique testified side by side. Monique spoke softly but clearly, recounting how a simple message on her phone initiated a chain reaction of reform. When a lonely voice speaks truth, she told lawmakers, the tides of injustice can shift. The passage of the FLMC Act drew bipartisan applause. Airlines across the globe pledged similar commitments. Horizon Airlines rolled out its Every Seat, Every Story campaign, featuring diverse travelers sharing moments of kindness aloft. In one commercial, Monique returned to first class, greeted by a friendly Parker who served her with genuine respect. The ad closed with Parker's voice, "Every passenger belongs where their ticket takes them." A year later, Monique returned to the Smithsonian exhibit commemorating Flight 263. She walked the display cases containing the boarding pass, the FAA recorder, and the boarding gate video stills. Parker stood beside her, now in civilian attire, her uniform badge retired. They exchanged a quiet hug. Parker whispered, "Your courage saved thousands of people from being unseen," Monique replied. "Your willingness to learn saved my faith in humanity." In classrooms, Monique's story became part of civic education curricula. Schools held stand-up, speak-out days, teaching students to be active bystanders. Community centers hosted workshops led by former flight attendants. Monique herself toured the country, speaking at churches and senior centers, reminding older generations that empathy transcends age and comfort zones. Back in Richmond, Monique's photograph, her young face calm in that gray hoodie, hung in the airport terminal as a permanent reminder. Passengers passing beneath it paused briefly, recalling how easy it is to judge and how hard it can be to stand firm. Ms. Parker's framed apology letter hung nearby, a testament to the power of humility and the belief that a single change of heart can alter countless destinies. And somewhere high above the clouds, every time a Horizon Airlines jet ascended, its passengers boarded, knowing they flew in an industry forever changed by a brave teenager who refused to sit down when injustice demanded silence. Months passed since Flight 263, but Monique Holloway's life never returned to normal. Every morning she awoke to a world changed by a single, quiet act, refusing to leave her seat. Her gray hoodie still hung in the front hall closet at home in Richmond, Virginia, a testament to courage hidden beneath an unassuming exterior. She wore it only on special occasions now, when speaking at schools, churches, or civic events, reminding herself and others that bravery often hides in plain sight. Her teenage days blended study sessions and activism. At Jefferson High, the student council elected her vice president, and she organized workshops on bystander intervention. Walking the hallways, she felt both pride and lingering pain. Friends whispered congratulations, but some classmates, envious of her sudden fame, spread rumors on social media that she had overreacted, that her drama cost an airline millions. Monique learned early that justice rarely comes without backlash. At lunch, she sat with her closest allies, including Jasmine Tran, whose bright eyes brimmed with solidarity. Jasmine leaned across the table one afternoon and said quietly, "Monique, even if they hate you, you did the right thing." Emma dove into training seminars at Horizon Airlines headquarters. She faced former colleagues who eyed her warily. Some refused to shake her hand. In a role reversal, Emma listened to passengers recount stories of discrimination. An elderly Jewish woman accused of sneaking into kosher meals, a non-binary flyer forced to use the wrong restroom, a disabled veteran denied wheelchair assistance until he insisted. Each account etched lines of guilt across Emma's face, but also fueled her resolve. She drafted a proposal for peer-led reflection groups among flight crews, arguing that only through honest dialogue could attitudes change. Her manager, skeptical at first, finally nodded. "Your experience gives you authority," he said grudgingly. "Use it well." One crisp autumn morning, Evelyn Brooks traveled to Chicago for a federal aviation safety summit. In a grand ballroom, rows of chairs faced a stage hung with the FAA seal. Evelyn, poised in a tailored navy suit, stepped to the lectern and began, "We must build systems where justice isn't an afterthought." The audience, legal counsel, regional supervisors, communications directors, listened. A regional supervisor from Texas raised his hand. "Director Brooks, how do we ensure it's not just lip service?" Evelyn's steady gaze cut through the room. "By holding every employee accountable and every passenger empowered to speak. Silence is complicity." Murmurs rippled. Later, in a back hallway, the Texas supervisor cornered Evelyn. "I admire your passion," he said, "but our hands are tied by cost centers and schedules." Evelyn smiled softly. "Cost of injustice is far greater than any delay." Meanwhile, Ronald Hastings returned to his life in New York City. The expensive watch on his wrist now felt like an albatross. He published an op-ed in a national newspaper, "Why I Regret Staying Silent at 30,000 Feet." The article detailed his conflict, urging affluent travelers to use privilege responsibly. Responses poured in. Messages of support, but also harsh critiques calling him hypocrite, saying he only spoke out because of public pressure. Yet Harold found renewal in dialogue. He joined a nonprofit board focused on disability advocacy in travel, working to improve accessibility on airlines. His wife, Elena, watched him transform his guilt into action. "We can't erase the past," she said, "but we can pave the way for a fairer future." Back in Richmond, Monique prepared for a speaking tour of senior centers. The first stop was Sunflower Manor, a retirement community where residents gathered in a cozy lounge. Monique greeted them with a warm smile. She told her story, boarding pass, gray hoodie, silent stand, and watched tears glisten on faded cheeks. One woman, septuagenarian Sylvia, rose. Her voice quavered as she recounted witnessing segregation in her youth. "I never spoke up," she admitted. "But you remind me it's never too late." Monique's heart swelled. The cycle of silence had begun to break. Across generations, as autumn deepened, Horizon Airlines rolled out its "Stand with Every Seat" campaign. Television spots and online ads featured real passengers, an immigrant family, a man and his service dog, a young black mother with twin infants. Welcomed aboard first class with genuine smiles. Emma Parker appeared in one ad, offering fresh blankets to an elderly man with trembling hands. She memorized her lines, "No matter who you are, you belong here." During the shoot, she watched the man's gratitude shine through. After wrapping, Emma lingered, approaching him privately to apologize again for her past failure. He embraced her. "Your words matter more now, because you choose to keep trying." Despite these efforts, backlash persisted. On an online forum for frequent flyers, a heated thread called the campaign a PR stunt, accusing Horizon of pandering to snowflakes. Emma, monitoring comments as part of her training role, fought waves of resentment. She drafted empathic responses to each poster, acknowledging frustration with delays but pointing to systemic change. Some trolls mocked her name. She reminded herself of Lily's words. "Don't give up on people." She pressed send. In Washington, D.C., the FLLC Act was introduced into Congress. During a packed hearing, Monique and Evelyn testified alongside air safety experts. Monique spoke calmly. "When I sat down and did nothing, people assumed I didn't belong. I had a ticket, but the system treated me as if I were invisible. We can fix that with clear rules and accountability." Lawmakers asked pointed questions about enforcement. Evelyn outlined FAA oversight measures, including random cabin audits and mandatory reporting deadlines. Time and again she returned to the same refrain. Fair treatment must be built into every protocol. The bipartisan support surprised even veteran lobbyists. Constituents had seen the story unfold on every screen and demanded real reform. But as winter arrived, challenges mounted. Horizon Airlines reported a 12% uptick in diversity trainings no-shows. Some crew members resisted the new standards. A leaked memo from a veteran attendant criticized the ridiculous nanny state approach. Social media users dug up old tweets and photos attacking Monique's personal life. Suddenly, Monique found herself the target of harassment. Messages telling her to shut up, to stop playing the race card. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Teresa, her mother, found her tears pooling as she read the words. Teresa wrapped her arms around Monique. "Hold fast to what you know is right," she whispered. Monique wiped her eyes and sent a message to Evelyn. "I'm scared." Evelyn replied instantly, "You made a difference once. You can weather this storm too." One evening, Emma Parker received a visit from her estranged brother Daniel, whom she had cut off after their mother's death. Daniel confronted her. "You think you're some hero now? You almost lost everything." Emma's voice trembled. "I lost myself first. I wanted to hide, but then I realized my mistakes could teach others. I'm trying to fix it." Daniel's anger turned to tears. "I just missed the old you." Emma reached across, took his hand. "I never want to lose that me again." They embraced, healing wounds that had festered in the shadow of Emma's public shame. In January, Horizon Airlines faced its first real test. A viral video showed a passenger ignored mid-flight because she spoke limited English. Images of the young woman pleading at the galley circulated alongside headlines referencing Flight 263. Emma Parker sprang into action. She personally reached out to the passenger, Gladys Morales, a nurse from El Paso. She arranged for Gladys to attend training sessions as a guest speaker. Gladys's measured account, translated kindly by an interpreter, moved even the most jaded crew members to tears. Emma watched from the back of the cabin as Gladys boarded first class again, treated with courtesy. It felt like justice in motion. Meanwhile, Ronald Hastings's nonprofit launched a pilot program in Newark to train ground staff on unconscious bias. Facing budget cuts, his team struggled to demonstrate quick wins. He flew to New Jersey personally, leading workshops for baggage handlers. One trainee, Marcus, confessed that he had refused to load wheelchairs in the past. Ronald guided him through empathy exercises, role plays that mirrored Monique's moment in the cabin. By day's end, Marcus apologized publicly and volunteered to mentor new hires on passenger dignity. Ronald felt proud as he watched systemic culture begin to shift from the ground up. In Congress, the FLLZ Act stalled in committee amid budgetary squabbles. A hawkish senator from Florida argued the FAA lacked funds to enforce new audits. Evelyn Brooks called him directly. Over the phone, she explained how discrimination costs more in lawsuits, negative publicity, and lost consumer trust than audit budgets ever would. She shared Horizon's numbers, a 20% increase in customer satisfaction since reforms began. The senator relented. He added an amendment to fund the program with existing penalties collected from enforcement actions. The FLP Act advanced to a vote. The following day, the bill passed by an overwhelming margin. News anchors hailed it as a landmark civil rights era for aviation. Monique watched from home, her mother asleep on the couch beside her. She pressed her palm to her heart as the anchor concluded, "Flight 203 will forever remind us that justice can triumph in the quietest moments." Monique whispered, "Thank you," both to the camera and to her own steady courage. In spring, Emma Parker returned to Chicago to attend a graduation ceremony for Horizon's first cohort of aviation ambassadors trained under the new program. As each graduate walked across the stage, certificates in hand, they pledged to uphold the code of empathy. When Emma's name was called to deliver a keynote, she stepped up, voice steady. "I once judged a girl by her appearance. Today, I stand judged by my actions. May we all learn that every passenger carries a story worth honoring." The audience rose in applause that echoed with sincerity. Monique traveled back to Washington for the bill's signing ceremony at the FAA headquarters. Evelyn Brooks stood beside her as Vice President of the United States drove the pen across parchment. When the new law took effect, the room erupted in cheers. Monique felt a surge of relief and responsibility. She pressed forward to hug Evelyn. "We did it," she said, voice cracking. Evelyn smiled through tears. "You did it." That night, as Monique lay in bed, her phone lit with notifications. Messages from around the world sharing stories of small acts of kindness on flights. A Japanese tourist wrote about a toddler soothed by an attendant. A German student described language lessons conducted mid-air. A Kenyan businessman praised crew for asking about his health. Monique realized that her single act had sparked a global effort to see one another. Emma Parker drove home through Chicago's spring rain, her windshield wipers tracing steady arcs. Radio news discussed Horizon's stock surging after positive customer reports. The business world hailed the airline's transformation as a case study in corporate responsibility. Emma felt pride but knew the work was ongoing. She pulled into her driveway, hugged her daughters, and whispered, "We keep going." At Richmond's airport, a permanent display was unveiled near Gate B3, a photograph of Monique in her gray hoodie, boarding pass in hand, titled, "Justice Above All." Plaques around the image told the story of Flight 263 and the FLS Act. Travelers paused, reading the inscription. "A single voice can awaken an industry." Monique stood beside Ronald Hastings and Jasmine Tran, watching strangers gaze upon her image. One elderly woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Monique squeezed Jasmine's hand and mouthed, "It was worth it." Years later, Monique authored a memoir titled Silent Wings, Loud Hearts, charting her journey from a shy teen to a national advocate. The book topped bestseller lists, but more importantly, it inspired school projects, corporate trainings, and community dialogues on empathy. Emma Parker contributed a foreword, acknowledging her role in the story and vowing that she would never revert to old habits. On a sunny afternoon, Monique visited the elementary school where she first learned about Rosa Parks. She sat in the same classroom and told children how a young person's refusal to remain invisible changed a nation's skies. A kindergartner raised her hand. "Can I make a difference too?" Monique beamed. "Every day, in every way, you can." As the children applauded, Monique thought back to that first day in first class, the hush of the cabin, the weight of silence. She realized that moments of cruelty can transmute into movements of compassion, that one voice can become a chorus, and that justice, once awakened, travels on wings far beyond any cabin door. And in the quiet triumph of her own heart, she understood that true revenge is not a shout, but a still, unwavering stand for what is right, an echo that resonates long after the world settles. Celeste Rivers sat with quiet dignity as the cabin lights flickered to a soft glow. All around her, passengers who had once looked away now wore the weight of their own silence. It was that stillness in the face of blatant injustice that forced everyone to listen. Because respect is not something you earn by fitting in. Respect is a default right that needs no invitation. She did not have to raise her voice. She did not have to storm the aisle. She simply remained in her seat, clutching her boarding pass, a token that required no validation beyond its printed authority, and in that calm posture, she challenged a system that had taught people whose faces belonged and whose did not. The world remembered Flight 263 not for its destination, but for the moment it came to a halt mid-air. It was never about travel plans or schedules. It was about a young woman who refused to disappear when someone else decided she did not belong. Celeste did not shout. She did not fight physically. She simply remained where she had every right to be. What followed was a crescendo of accountability. The Federal Aviation Administration grounded the plane. Horizon Airlines was forced to face its own biases, and the flight attendant, whose cruelty had set it all in motion, saw her authority stripped away. It was a reckoning so dramatic that even the sturdiest corporate walls could not contain it. The cruelty that spurred this change must be understood. The attendant had sneered and banished Celeste to the back row, leaving her humiliated and alone. Her commands cut through the cabin like a knife, and for a moment no one dared speak up. That cruelty was sharp and intentional, born of an assumption that skin color could determine worth. Then came the message that changed everything. Celeste tapped out a single line on her phone. "I was forced out of first class. No anger, no pleading, just fact." That one message reached Evelyn Brooks, a family friend with enough clout to demand action. Within minutes, the engines fell silent, and a federal directive held the plane in place. From that moment on, there was no hiding from the truth. Passengers, some wealthy, some ordinary, sat in stunned silence as the cabin door stayed open. They waited, not for comfort, but for justice. They had all chosen silence once, but this time, they were witnesses to a higher standard. Even after the formal apologies and the promise of new policies, the real victory lay in the look on Celeste's face when she reclaimed her seat. It was not triumphal. It was the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew she had stood her ground. That moment delivered a lesson, louder than any speech. Because respect is not a reward you give to those who look the part. Respect is the standard by which all people should be treated. When Celeste returned to first class, there were no cheers. Only an atmosphere charged with regret and a fresh sense of accountability. In the weeks that followed, Horizon Airlines instituted mandatory retraining, dual-scan boarding procedures, and an anonymous hotline for discrimination reports that went directly to the FAA. The flight attendant who had acted with contempt was removed from service and became a cautionary tale in training videos. But genuine change demands more than policy. It calls for every individual to examine their own assumptions. In everyday life, when we see someone dismissed or demeaned, we must choose to speak up. Silence in those moments is not neutral, it is complicity. Celeste's stand taught a generation of travelers that one small act at the right moment can shatter entrenched systems. She did not need to shout or protest with placards. She simply refused to be moved. That quiet resolve echoed far beyond the cabin, inspiring legislative reform and corporate responsibility. Real strength is not loud resistance. It is standing firm, believing in your worth when everyone else doubts you. It is knowing that even if you are alone in that moment, your dignity is non-negotiable. Celeste did not need a megaphone. Her unwavering posture became the loudest statement of all. And as the skies above America once again filled with the hum of jet engines, the memory of Flight 263 lived on. It reminded every passenger, from the woman in the beige sweater at the window seat to the businessman poring over spreadsheets in first class, that respect is a right, not a privilege. Every ticket holds the same promise, a journey granted without prejudice. Thanks to Celeste's act of courage, that promise became law. But more deeply, it became a moral compass for all who witness wrongdoing. Silence may feel safe, but complicity carries a burden far heavier. In the end, the real change did not begin with a storm. It began with a young woman refusing to back down. That single moment of calm defiance forced an entire society to confront its own biases, mid-flight. And for every heart that heard that message, there was no forgetting the lesson. Because respect is the default, kindness is not measured by silent sympathy, but by the actions we take, or refuse to take. Celeste Rivers proved that sometimes the most powerful roar is the resolute silence of standing your ground.